Today I'm going to follow on from the tree demo, and we're going to do a little painting using some of those techniques and just to see how we can put it into a context. So I'm going to turn the camera around and get painting. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start off by putting a background wash, and then whilst I'm waiting for that to dry I'll tell you a little bit more about brushes and colours and things that I'm using here. So I'm just going to get a little bit of space. We're going to have a nice peachy coloured sky. So start off by wetting my sky. Just wetting that down. I want some of these lovely peachy colours down here, and they will also get reflected in my water down there. And then have a little bit of a blue at the top, just fading into those peachy colours. I'll explain the wet in a second whilst that's drying off. Just have a little bit of that darker down here. Okay, now I need to allow that to dry a little bit, so I'm just going to explain one or two little things to you. Start off, I'm using this fabulous wash brush. It's a Da Vinci brush. These are available through the SAA, and I do have them branded for me, so if anybody's interested I will let me know and I'll send you a link. Now when you're putting in a wash, the reason I wet the paper first is because it allows me to float the colour on, and it gives me a nice soft gentle colour across the picture. So the water just allows you to float that colour down. Now you ideally need to let that dry completely if you want crisp marks. At the background here I wouldn't mind having some soft marks. So I'm going to just put in some distant trees. Do you remember we had the sort of blue-grey colour? So I'm just going to put some of those in using that triangle technique, just as a bit of background here. Now when you do paint wet in wet, what tends to happen is the colour becomes softer because it's diluted by the paint that's already on the paper, by the water that's already on the paper. So I'm taking it that far. Now that can dry off a little bit. Now I just want to show you my palette. My palette is always filthy. For me, my favourite colour in the world is muck off the palette, so there's always a little bit of something in the corner that is just the colour that I need to use. But I do clean a bit down when I want a clear space. Everybody paints differently, there's no right or wrong. If you want to clean your palette each time, apart from the fact you're wasting paint, that's fine. That's absolutely fine, no problems whatsoever. So that has dried back a little bit. So let's have a little look and bring some colour forward. So I'm brightening this up a little bit. I'm adding a bit of sap green into my blue-green that I had at the back there. So this is just brightening this a little bit. And as we did before, I'm going to use some shadow colours just as that comes down to the water's edge. Pick up a slightly smaller brush. And also I'm just going to reflect a little bit of that colour into the water. And Just spread that ever so slightly. Lost a bit too much, so it's all about putting it in, bringing it back, taking it out, adding it back in. I don't really want, see these little dots, that's just bubbles of water. I don't really want that because they're going to possibly dry with a few cauliflowers, which we don't really want. Okay, so that's our distant bank there. Now on this area here we've got lots of shadows in these trees, but I'll build the shadows up later. I'm going to start light to dark, and then I'm going to put some of this background colour going on here. I'm going to keep this quite soft because so then those lighter colours can show up on top. So again, just putting in a vague colour really, just something that will go behind these trees here. Now I can start adding a bit of this bank. I've worked out where my trees are going to go, and generally speaking the trunks are darker than the background, but we can do something about it if they're not. Watercolour is more forgiving than you think. So the colour's getting stronger as I come forward. So just putting these in here, again using my nice broad brush to start with. Just dripping some darker colours in at the bottom. Now at this level we're starting to see a bit more texture, so I'm just going to use the tip of the brush just to do a bit of scratching. Doesn't show up that much at the moment, but what happens is you create a little dent in the paper, and eventually that paint will just fall into those dents and give you a slightly darker area. Again, coming forward, a bit richer again in colour, so it's just more paint to get you that richness of colour. Now this shows me that's not dark enough up at the top there yet, so now whilst I've got this colour, I'm just going to put some water down here and just let some of that colour reflect. Right, so this makes me see that this bit isn't dark enough yet, so we're just adding some strength of shadows in there. Again, just drag some of that out. Adding different layers. Vary the colour a little bit. Let's fade it out a little bit, so put that back in. Okay, so we've got a bit of atmosphere going. We need to put our darks along the front of this piece now. So you can see this is coming together. It's a very simple little sketch, but it's coming together quite quickly. What I want to get, bear with me. Before that dark completely dries off, I've just got here just a piece of bamboo stick, and I just want to scratch up into that, get some light coming in front of that shadow area. All I'm doing is scraping the paint away. Keep these crossing over and going in lots of different directions. Again, just adding another texture to it. Just a few little lumpy bits at the bottom I want to get rid of. And then come back into putting my dark down here. Again, I'm going to pull some of those up, and I'll scrape some light into them as well in a minute. Now, putting this down into the reflection too, but I'm trying not to scratch this, I'm just dragging here. I've got a nice couple of nice big scratches going up. I need a couple of nice big scratches coming down. Now I'm going to need a bit more dark in here, but that's going to need to dry off a little bit first, and then I'll put another layer of dark excuse me, into there. Now before that dries off too completely, I'm just going to take my flat brush. I've just cleaned it and I've just pressed it so that I've got a nice thin edge there, and I'm just going to lift out just a couple of little ripples. In the water. There we go. Okay, so I need to start building this big tree on the right hand side, because I need that to allow to have a bit of drying time. So I'm starting off with these light colours. So you can see down here there's a lot of light. So we'll start off again, big brush strokes. Don't forget to leave gaps for the birds to fly through. We will build on all of this later. We will add our shadows into it. There we go. Now, as I did before, I'm going to put a little bit of shadow colour on whilst that's still wet, but I'll come back in and do some more once that has dried back. So we've got a little bit of shape there of that tree. And as before, I'm going to put the foliage in before I put in the trunks of our tree. It allows me to not have to try and overpaint lighter on darker. So this is just a slightly different colour, and this tree isn't quite so expansive as the one on the other side. There's kind of almost little bits of red in this, so I'm just going to add a few of these little red touches too. Such a different colours coming across here. So we've got a couple of floaty trees now with no trunks, nowhere that they're grounded. And whilst we're here, I can put in a little bit of this grassy area that's down here. Again, just using my nice big brush. Like we did before, just start with a little bit of scratching, a bit of dragging, and we'll add into that as we go along. So we'll build that up. So I'm jumping around the picture because it allows me to leave things to dry off a little bit. So I left this bit, I wanted this to dry off before I added any more dark into it. It's almost there, so I'll come back to that in just a tick. So all of these areas are just drying back a little bit. I think I'm going to go in, we've got some trees that haven't come into leaf yet in the middle here. So I'm going to start working into those. And for this I'm using a blue and brown mix, so an ultramarine with a little bit of umber. So this is going back to the techniques that we were using before. So we've got a trunk that comes in here, comes up, and if you remember the twiddling, then we've got some branches that come across this way. That needs to thicken up a little bit. Bit of twiddling going on there. I'm going to make a little bit darker. Just come back in, drip some darker colours into there. Now this is where muck off the palette comes in very useful. It's always quite dark muck off the palette. The darker leaves, the branches that you paint in, the stronger they are. But if you just clean your brush out a little bit and paint it with very faint colour, then it doesn't look so intense, it doesn't look so strong. Now, just looking for a fine brush just to do some few little twiddles at the top there. Don't forget to cross these branches over. If you don't have any branches crossing, then it can look a bit 2D. So we've got that one going there. There's another one coming up behind, and I'm doing this one afterwards because I can then drop it behind what I'm doing. So I'm not again trying to paint over stuff, so it's going to come in. So there we are. Now this is dried back enough for me to put the trunk in next. Okay. Again, just putting it in those gaps. There you go. So it's almost there with this bit. But now we can come back in and start putting similar colours to we had before. Oh no, it's not quite dry enough yet. No, see what I mean? You just have to try. Some of that's still a bit wet, so I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Hopefully, let's have a feel. Yeah, that's just about dry enough now, so let's come back into that bit. coming down to that waterline with a darker colour. This time I'm just going to use a damp brush. There's no paint on this brush, but because the brush is damp it'll pull those bits of wet paint up. Again, layering, it's just different ways of doing it. So many different ways of doing it. There isn't a right or a wrong. So we've got that waterline here. Now while that's drying off, I'm going to come back over to this side. I think I'm going to put a couple of branches in first, and then I'll put my extra shadows in. Okay, so down here is going to be quite a thick old trunk hiding in the base here. So I've done some with that slightly bigger brush, then just coming in with my smaller brush. And that looks a little bit strong at the minute, but I know I haven't put all my shadows into the tree itself, so I'm just negative painting some grasses down in amongst there, so that stands out all right. So we shall come into our shadow for that tree. It's darker patches within this tree, and they're generally going to be at the top of where the branches are, because that's where the next shadow drops down. And I'm painting quite a lot with the side of the brush, and what this does is it just captures the surface of the paper, so it doesn't cover the paper entirely. It's just this sort of broken mark, dry brush mark. Just going to top up some of these brighter colours as well now they've dried back. Again, still just using the side of the brush. Something I haven't done with my branches. There's a few branches that kind of come way down here. Just breaking away from that tree and hanging over the water. Now what that does do, I need to put some water in here, because some of those leaf colours do need to be reflected in my water. Don't want to lose all of that sort of pinkiness that we put on there. I also just want to put a little bit of shadow colour in the background here. And then again we just need to put another layer of colours within this, some more strength of shadows. just going to put a bit of brown into there as well. It's not always just green or green, so there we go. Just come in and add some shadow colour in on this trunk here. So it's just building. I'm doing this very quickly, but it's just to give you an idea of, you know, how you can work this. Okay, now let's come back to these reds and greens over here. Now this has dried off a bit and it's just layering. All I'm doing this for is just to give it a bit more depth of colour. Again, something we could do with is a reflection from these trees, so I'm just putting some water down here. And then a reflection of these trunks coming through. In the water. And as we did before, I'm just going to lift out those ripples again. It's just using a clean, dry brush. Because I'm messy, I'm just going to do a little bit of some splattering on here, so this is just tapping my brush just to get a bit of texture into that foliage, and it messes things up a bit, and I like things a little bit messier. Just do a few on this side, and then all I'm doing is tapping them with my finger, which just multiplies them really. Defined there at the end of those branches. Now we've got our basic trees in a landscape. So it's just putting it into a context. So let's come and say goodbye to you. There we go. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you have a go. Thank you. Bye bye.